2. Recorded live.
Look to the sky and see God's perfect harmony. Don't trust the global light. Look with your own eyes. Look to the sky and see. God gave us eyes to see His perfect harmony. The moon in her own light. Walking day and night, the sun coming up, the sun going down, the curtain of stars from the heavens around. Look to the sky and see. Look to the earth and know God causes all things to grow. Stretched out the earth in place, established her from base. Trust in the only God you know. Look to the sky and see God's presence harmony. Don't trust the global light. Look with your own eyes. Look to the sky and see one God, creator of heaven and earth.
Greetings and welcome to Hour of Discernment on January 27th, 2016. Well, I've been looking forward to this for about a week, and yesterday on the broadcast, I reviewed my guest, Robbie Davidson's video. It's called The Global Lie Flat Earth Revelation. And with that, welcome to the broadcast, Robbie.
Thanks for having me, Walt. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Well, listen, I have to, this flat Earth movement has moved me in more than one way, and I think it's more than a movement. And one of the reasons I think your documentation it comes from the biblical view, and so. And yesterday we talked about, I reviewed heliocentric and geocentric. And with that, I'd just like to have you introduce your video and tell your testimony.
Well, yeah, I'm basically coming up with the concept and doing my research for the last 6 months, uncovering, the root. I think for most of the church, they were busy, basically attacking the branches of the tree and never really looking at the root. And if you understand the entire war of creation versus evolution, you'll see that most of the attack was centered around, the Darwin model that, we evolved over, millions of years, and we came from ancestors as monkeys. And again, this was the lie that was, all focused on. But again, you have to kind of dig deeper and find out, well, where did this lie originate from? Where do we get evolution? And if you look back, you'll see that you get it through the entire heliocentric model that was proposed. Now, again, this had gone on for a while, but it didn't take root until Nicholas Copernicus, came out. And indeed, it was the Copernican heliocentricity concept that gradually broke the back of Bible credibility as a source of absolute truth in Christendom. Once the Copernican revolution had conquered the physical sciences of astronomy and physics and put down deep roots in universities and lower schools everywhere, it was only a matter of time until the biological sciences launched the Darwinian revolution. So if you understand that this is kind of the connection, between the two, and seeing that basically from the beginning of time, Satan has been after attacking, the authority and the foundation of the Word of God. And again, if you can get the Word, you can get the foundation to crumble, you can start doubting parts of the foundations of the Bible, then everything is opened up to interpretation. And I think that's where the devil has laid his assault, is definitely when it came to the creation account, but also, clear verses, throughout the entire Bible that talk about how we're geocentric, we're stationary, and that everything that was created above us moves, circuits, it does its thing, but we don't. And that's one of the things that they needed to break. They needed to break that whole paradigm, and they've done an incredible job. Throughout the centuries, there's always been great men of faith that have been crying in the wilderness, warning, about Copernicus models and such. And if you actually even look at the early church, and even the great reformers, I mean, you have like Martin Luther, you've got Augustine, you've got John Calvin. I mean, these guys were going so far as to say that these men that were coming and proposing up these ideas, were possessed by the devil. So they were warning, and rightfully so. But unfortunately, it gained ground rapidly in the church, through Rome, through the Catholic Church. And there's a story there with Galileo and how they did the Hegelian dialectic in creating an illusion that they would be fighting, science versus religion. And that's what they proposed to us, that science is wonderful. The scientific method is great. But when science gets hijacked and it becomes an agenda and it becomes theories and beliefs, these are the theories that were set up that basically to this day, they're considered fact. And anyone that tries to debate these are considered, they're ridiculed, they're laughed at. But indeed, once you look into it, just like the lies of evolution, all these theories about the heliocentric Big Bang universe they're theories. And they are not scientifically proven. So when you apply the real scientific method, you will find that a lot of this stuff cannot be proved scientific. These are things that took hold to further destroy the credibility of the Bible. And all the scientists that came after Copernicus, if anything, they got all their illumination from the great enlightenment and discovery that he had made when, up until that time, it was always considered through science about a geocentric, stationary Earth.
Can you hear me, Robbie?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I would like to make a comment. In your studies, did you ever look at who is the father of the Big Bang?
Well, when you're getting into it, like you're going back into, if you're starting, the Big Bang, it was coined by different, people. Basically, it came to a point where actually the Big Bang actually wasn't even like the correct title, but it took hold. And when you do your research, you'll find that basically they just ran with the whole Big Bang theory. But you'll find that later on they had some major problems, and to this day they still have some major problems. Yet it's just like evolution. Anyone that speaks out against this, there's scientists that are around the world that are scared about publishing their findings, losing credibility, losing their job, just like everything that's going on within the major universities. This is this is a group, an elite group, that do not allow anyone else to propose any ideas. And the whole idea of science is all about questions. Well, they don't want anything questioned anymore. This is fact, they say, and anything that fits their model, they will use. Anything that doesn't, they will throw out. So, looking into it, you can kind of see how, even before there were ideas there, but actually the Big Bang was a relatively new concept. But you'll see that Copernicus kind of eroded Ptolemy's, findings, but he absolutely hated the church, hated, the Bible account. And if you research all the major scientific, discoveries, and I'm talking from Kepler and Newton and Galileo, and, understand that if you go deeper into it, you will find out that there's a very, hidden kind of agenda taking place because they needed to erode the credibility of the Bible. The Bible clearly says, that the sun moves in multiple occasions. And some people will say, well, that was the translation of that day, or the men didn't understand that. But you have clear directives of commanding the sun to stop. And you have major issues, when you're talking about the Earth, stop spinning, if it was indeed, spinning at 1,000 miles at the equator. You've got problems with it flying through space. All of these things, it just takes someone to research it and digest the information, come in with an open mind, but look at the Bible, look at kind of what they're, speaking and what they're teaching, and you will find that it's a polar opposite of everything that is being taught. So it's something that is very, very important. Even if, any of your listeners are, literal 6-day creationists, they believe in a young Earth versus millions of years old. Well, you have a problem because day 4, the sun, moon, and stars are created. So if the Earth is created, what is it orbiting? If we're taught the heliocentric model that, we're orbiting around the sun at 660,000 miles an hour. I mean, just understand that right now what science teaches is that we are traveling around the sun faster than lightning. I mean, it is absolutely incredible, these figures. And it's just like evolution where they bring in millions and millions and billions. They mask everything in large numbers so that, we just have to take their word for it because, who of us are going to go out and do that math? But when you start thinking about these logically, you'll find that there's some major issues.
Well, if you do a Google search on father of the Big Bang, you will come to Georges Lemaitre. He's a Belgian cosmologist, a Catholic priest, and also a Jesuit. Mm-hmm. So, the Jesuits had their hand in it at the very beginning, because Galileo came about, after the King James Bible was published. So they were, and also if you do, the father of the New Age is the New Age movement is also a Jesuit. He's a Frenchman, and I can't pronounce his name right now. But don't you think, Robbie, that heliocentric was the birth of the New Age movement?
Yeah, I think obviously it was the birth of many things. I mean, we're talking about, if you understand the heliocentric model, all the lies, everything that you start seeing, that's happening around the world. I mean, you can get into so many things. You can even get into futuristic things like the transhumanistic movement. Everything originates from the idea that they're going to find other life out there, that the other life will create the answers for us at some point, possibly. And I mean, you have major scientists. Richard Dawkins is a big believer of this, but most credible, in the scientific community are definitely talking about how feasible it would be for an intelligent life form to have injected their DNA into a monkey, and created us at some point in the universe. So understand that basically, for the great deception that's going to come into the world, it says it will deceive the whole world. And I'm looking at it more and more in my research that could it be that science is the great one world religion that's spoken about? In ways, it's something that has been masqueraded as fact, but indeed it is religion. It's almost everyone, believes this and takes this as fact. It was almost like Satan's assault. Rather than come up with a new belief system, he comes up with fact. He comes up with something that cannot be disputed. It's not a belief. It's reality, or so he, wanted to tell the world. And yet we've bought this hook, line, and sinker. And I mean, Satan has worked with great big agencies such as the scientific community, but also when you're getting into like the space agencies, because up until, the 1960s, really everyone took this upon, as faith, as far as the spinning balls flying through space. But it wasn't until, the Apollo missions that on the very last mission, on the way home, they took a picture of the Earth. And from that picture, it was settled. Everything's settled now. We've got the picture. We know we're on a ball. We spin and we fly through space. But there's major problems when you start looking into that. You have major problems with the fact that it's almost been 50 years. They've never been back, nor has any other country. So again, I think when it comes to putting your trust in NASA, and again, you mentioned, Jesuits. Well, I'd say like most of these great men have been either Jesuits or high degree Masons. And if you start researching based on the spirituality of these people and their Masonic roots, then you've got some major problems, especially with the foundations in the beginning of NASA. Jack Parsons, his tie with Aleister Crowley. You've got some high-level Luciferian systems running in the creation of these agencies. So if we are just going to look at NASA and we're going to look in our science textbook and we're going to refute the Bible, woe to the man. I mean, the church, early church and the reformers were saying, like, it is crazy to take the theories of man over the word of God. Be careful where the source is, because when you start reading the word the way it was meant to be, you will find there's very, clear indications, not only that the earth doesn't move and that it is fixed, but also the stars, the sun, and the moon, they all have their own circuit. But we have literally been taught the lie that no, the sun is the center point, and everything orbits the sun. And again, if you follow this right back to Nimrod, but you get into Greece, Rome, you get into all the early pagan belief systems, the sun has always been the focal point. And again, that's a whole other discussion for another time. But understand that, are we any different now than when we're focusing and putting all the emphasis on the sun? Nothing happens without the sun. And again, that's been Satan's drive all throughout history, is to drive people more to worship the sun and give the significance to the sun over the earth. And I think it's been a huge lie that, just happy that God is revealing it to, thousands of people at this time.
Well, Robbie, you've mentioned several times that heliocentric was designed to take the credibility of the Bible away. And, I read a book. I've got a book here. I've had it for 4 years. I haven't totally digested it. It's called The Earth is Not Moving by Marshall Hall. And this is what I got out of this book. This is what he emphasizes, exactly the same thing. This was to take the credibility away from the Bible. And when we look at 1 Timothy 6:20, O Timothy, keep that which is committed to thy trust. Avoid profane and vain babblings and oppositions of science falsely so called. Yesterday I brought I don't have that right in my hand, but what John Calvin said, it really I can find that real quick. Let me read what John Calvin said. This is a quote from John Calvin. We will see some who are so deranged, not only in religion, but who in all things reveal their monstrous nature, that they will say that the sun does not move, and that it is the earth which shifts and turns. When we see such minds, we must indeed confess that the devil possesses them, and that God sets them before us as mirrors in order to keep us in his fear. John Calvin. Comments, Robbie?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, he had some harsh words. I mean, he went so far later on that quote to say that these men are madmen and they're possessed by the devil. I mean, he had strong words. And again, he was around in the days of, Copernicus. Again, it was one of those things where you have to understand what they were looking at. And a lot of people have been taught this other lie with the heliocentric Big Bang universe, is that people back then were ignorant. They weren't very intelligent. And as time has gone on, we have got more evolved. We've got more intelligent. So we are so much smarter than those, Neanderthals in the Bible. Again, that's another lie of evolution, of the Big Bang universe, creating that illusion that basically, of course, we know more than them with all of our technology. But if you actually start looking into it, you will find that there was a lot of intelligence. There was very, very smart men. And again, you have to look at even, the people that carried on after their warnings. Again, it had already taken root in most of the churches. But again, there were sound men of faith, even right up until 1900s, amazing, incredible books that are written. Again, we're now into 2016. Why is it that so many people from so many different walks are coming out with so much proof, scientific experimentation? Again, there's so many different proofs. If someone will start actually looking into this and say, could this be really? Could I have been lied to about this? No, it's too big. When people first start hearing about this, it's so massive of a deception that it's almost ridiculed. It's like, no, there's no way it could be that big a lie. And yes, it can be that big of a lie, because once you get someone believing a big lie, it's easy for someone to believe all the little ones. So understand that if you shift someone's worldview and you create that, everything else is, easy underneath that. So it's something that I believe that needed to be in place, just for all the plans and the grand design. And just if you study all of the men and you understand how everything kind of goes pieced together, you can clearly see this. You can clearly see how it is. I mean, right back from the lie in the Garden of Eden, and in Genesis, you will definitely see Satan's agenda was the first thing that comes out of Satan's mouth is he questions God. And again, what are we doing? Oh, does the Bible say that? Oh no, the Bible doesn't say that. That just meant this. Or oh no, you just take that allegory, take that as figurative, but you don't take that literal. And again, this is the same age-old lie that Satan wants to taunt us and just put into our ear. It's like, really? Come on, there's an explanation for that, So I think it's time for people to seriously look at it. It will rejuvenate your faith, your understanding. And just like the great creation ministries that came out, for a while, you were laughed at, and it was considered absurd not to believe in evolution. I mean, you had to be a moron. You had to be not very intelligent, to believe that, we didn't evolve. But again, all of a sudden, there were quite a few people that started looking into this, aspect, came out with very good materials, based it on science, gave us a lot of, not just we could just believe in something anymore. We could actually handle ourselves in a debate. We could have that confidence going through it. So now when it comes to this, it's considered laughed at or, oh, you have to be silly. Of course we know the universe and we know there's billions of galaxies and that every star is a sun and that the sun is 93 million miles away and the moon is 240,000 miles away. I mean, we know all these distances. Do we? Have we just been told that? Or can you start looking into it and find out, well, wait a minute, there's a lot of scientific evidence supporting the fact that the sun, moon, and stars are a lot closer and they're a lot smaller than what we've been told.
Can you hear me, Robbie?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted, when I first watched your video, within 20 minutes, I got a little watery. My eyes got a little watery because you can see how they have taken God's creation and made a ball out of it. A spaceship sailing through 66,000 miles an hour. And then another thing that caught my eye is you had one picture and you did a kind of a collage, and you had all the corporations with ball symbology. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, actually, that was a segment done by Will. The YouTube channel is Truth is Stranger Than Fiction. And again, basically, the video with globes in my mind. And it was just talking about how literally it's probably the one symbol, it's the one term, it's the one word that's so saturated into our society. I mean, it takes a while once you start researching to understand that we're not on a spinning ball to stop saying, on this planet or on the globe, I'm going to go around the globe. But understand that a lot of people starting to look into these things. We have been taught that anyone that thinks the world is flat is silly. We proved that wrong, however long ago. So it's not even worth your time looking into. And again, we've been showing the pictures of, boats going over the edge. If you understand the concept and you understand the biblical meaning and you get into it, you'll find out that it actually makes a lot of sense. It says in the Bible that God compassed the waters with bounds so that they would not overstep their boundaries. So you have to understand that he put bounds in place. And if you start looking at the different, like the models and the understanding, you will see that no, there's a good understanding. And a lot of people say, well, how can you go around the earth if it's flat? Well, you can take your finger on a dinner plate and go around in a circle. I mean, you can easily go around. You don't have to be on a ball to go around. But people, they need to see that paradigm shift where they start looking into it and going, okay, that makes sense. Like some people will say, well, how do you have day and night, if it's flat? I mean, but if you start looking up and you start seeing exactly that the sun and the moon have their circuit, they go into the Tropic of Capricorn and the Tropic of Cancer. You can start to actually see it, and you can see where the equator would be, that the sun would be, the hottest. I mean, there's major, major problems with the heliocentric Big Bang universe in every single thing. As much things as we found in evolution, I would say there's probably 10 times more problems when it comes to the distances they've told us, the sizes. I mean, literally, the Candelilla experiment, literally, I think it was in the 1800s. They use it still today. But it was hanging two balls on a shed roof, okay? And you have to look this up. But again, they teach this in the textbooks. But they hung two balls on a shed, and from that they got the mass of the Earth and the mass of all the planets, the moon, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, how absurd! By hanging two balls on a shed roof, they are going to find out the mass of the Earth. And again, like the opening in my film, The Global Lie, and also concluding it, getting into Job, where God clearly says, who of any of you would be able to measure the breadth of the earth from one end to the next? Well, wait a minute. I thought we had the whole thing measured out. I thought we knew how big it was. It's 25,000 miles in circumference. It's this heavy. We've got it all mapped out. Well, God's clearly saying, no, you can never fully comprehend it. And to me, that makes a lot more sense, that God would create something that we are just so in awe that we really can't even comprehend how incredible and how vast and amazing this world is.
Okay, you can hear me?
Yes.
Oh, excuse me. I'm 71 and I have a little memory. I've been muting my mics. And, the next question I'd like to just touch upon a little bit. I mean, don't you have to go into it heavy, but how has this affected you? I find this when the word has been programmed. Oh, I can relate to this. When I was growing up and I was in school, I can't tell you what grade, but I was shown that picture of the boat sailing off the edge of the, and how ridiculous to even think that the earth is flat. And I was just talking to a brother last night, and this ball that's spinning around in our head is going to be there. You're not going to just take it. You're not going to take this out overnight.
No.
And in other words, like, how are you? How do you handle? What are some of the rebuttals that you've got from close friends or relatives?
I would say the biggest one, especially within the church, would be that these verses, all the verses, and I mean there's hundreds of them, they're all to be taken allegory. I mean, they're not to be taken literal. And again, I guess the problem is, a lot of the people that are coming with these arguments are literal 6-day creationists. These are people that believe that the earth is 6,000 to 10,000 years old, not millions of years. They believe in the literal creation account as far as us. But when you get into, the universe, and I think, and I mentioned this, in the documentary, as well as other interviews, but I think it was very easy. I mean, when we came across the Big Bang, all we had to do was say, well, listen, you guys are saying that nothing became something, exploded, and created everything. I mean, that's totally not science. I mean, it's major problems, but nothing just, sitting there, all of a sudden it becomes something, explodes, and creates everything. Well, what we did is we said, well, God created everything. So we attached God to the Big Bang. And we said, aha, there you go. See, there's our argument. You guys don't know what created the bang. We're saying God. So we didn't have to even deal with that subject because we just quickly associated God with the Big Bang. And hey, it kind of made sense. God spoke it and everything just appeared. But the problem was how it all appeared, how God, created the world, how he created the sun, moon, and stars. We gave it a very man-made, anti-biblical, attachment to God. And I think that was the danger, is we started praising the universe and all the planets and everything like this, and yet we were starting to shift over to man's theories. Again, it's very clear in the Bible that it literally says the sun, the moon, and the stars. Now, people say, well, what do you do with those planets? Well, for the longest time, they were always considered the wandering stars. And I mean, you get into the Bible, you get into even extra, biblical texts such as the Book of Enoch. I mean, you can clearly see that, God clearly says it throughout the Bible that there is a sun, a moon, and he also created stars. So these stars, are relegated to, these are planets and these are terra firma. And just like we've been told the moon is something that's terra firma, God calls it a light. But again, now man, has us believing that we can land on these lights, that we can play, golf and we can drive around rovers on it. But again, there's major problems. I mean, there's major problems when all of a sudden the whole conquest of space and NASA is they're going to head to Mars. And then all of a sudden NASA, basically it says, well, we're going to cancel that mission. And now we're going to go back to the moon in 2030. Well, when 2025 hits, they're going to say something came up. We're going back to the moon in 2050. I tell people we're never going to the moon because we never have been to the moon. These things up in the sky are not meant to be landed on. They are lights. God clearly says what they're for. And I think that part of the illusion and the deception is verifying these things through an agency that everyone just blindly accepts and trusts and says, well, why would they lie? But if you look into the moon landing and you come to a point, you're like, I'm getting suspicious. It's almost been 50 years and they haven't been back, nor has any other country. You would think that Russia would want to be there and put their flag up on the moon, but again, and then you have Obama coming out and saying, people are saying we should go back to the moon, but I'm telling people, hey, we've already been there. I mean, I would say the biggest argument I get from people about the moon landing is we don't need to go back. We've already been there. And I'm thinking, with all the technological advances, we found out everything that we're going to know about the moon. It makes no sense. So the question is, if they haven't been to the moon, where have they been? Because if you actually look this up, you will find out since the moon, understand that they tell us the moon is 240,000 miles away. If you look this up, do you know the furthest that man has been in basically the last 50 years is 400 miles? Now, I'm not talking about the supposed probes or satellites. I'm talking about man. I mean, the Orion project got canceled, and in 2014 they came out with a video. I think it's called Trial Under Fire. But they admitted we're having major problems trying to figure out how can we go through the Van Allen radiation belt. So if there's a major Van Allen radiation belt that Orion and all their shielding and technology, they can't figure out how to get through it because they say we don't have to just get through it once. We got to get through it twice on the way up, on the way back. Well, wait a minute. Didn't you go through it no problem in the 60s? So there's some major things going on. And I think that's kind of where people should start looking to if they're putting so much trust into NASA and the Hubble telescope and, start researching these things because the only people that are giving us these pictures, go out with your telescope. People, I actually went out and bought a Nikon P900. It's a new camera that came out just last year. And it's got the most incredible zoom. It's got the greatest zoom out of any prosumer camera out there. Well, you can start zooming in on the moon with this thing. You can zoom in on stars. And in the documentary, I feature a bunch of people focusing in, not just with this camera, but also with some high-powered telescopes. They're, zooming in on stars. They're zooming in on the moon. Well, when you start looking at the stars, ask yourself the question, number one, are they trillions of miles away? But also, when you see them shift and morph and change colors and you see all the incredible things that you will see if you go out and, get a camera or a telescope, we've been told they're suns and we've been told all these things. But technology is starting to get to a point where people are saying, well, wait a minute, there's some major problems here. How is it that if the moon is 240,000 miles away, I can zoom in with my camera, a $600 camera, I can zoom in incredibly close on the moon. I'm talking details, like levels of, and there's certain things that I'm seeing that basically it doesn't make sense. And one of the things, and it's mentioned in my film, The Golden Lie, is the moon. It says in the Word of God that basically there's two lights. We've been told, the moon is a reflector of the sun. But what's really interesting is scientifically people are starting to test this. What they're finding is that when you're out in the sun, it's hot. You go into the shade, you cool down. Just like, if you, when we were young, we would take a magnifying glass and we could burn paper with the sunlight. Well, if you actually go into the moonlight and you start measuring it, people are doing this with infrared, electronic, temperature, and again, they're finding that basically the moon is cool. What's interesting is if you go out into the moonlight and you measure the temperature, if you go into the shade, you actually warm up. Not only do you warm up, but you can actually magnify moonlight to make objects even colder. So we are dealing with the sun as something that's giving off hot light. We're dealing with the moon that's giving off cool light. And again, the Bible's very clear in the King James. It literally says that the sun is masculine and that the moon is feminine. And it says the moon will not give her light. It clearly talks about the moon being self-illuminating and giving off its own light. But again, science has told us no, because they would have major problems. If they admitted that, just that one thing alone, the entire Big Bang universe that they've constructed in, all of their textbooks, would be faulty, because there's no way that the moon could be lit up if their theories are correct. So again, it's about doing those tests, go out, look at the world, look at God's beautiful creation and the senses that he's given you, just like Romans 1, and don't allow science to start distancing and tearing away that God, is not part, or that he's so further away. And it's like even the concepts of up and down. If you're on a spinning ball, rotating, wobbling, flying through space, where is up, where is down? Because clearly someone from space would be upside down, but we've been taught, no, we're all right side up because of gravity. All of these things are to confuse to twist, it's very easy when you understand that God is above us and, hell is below us. This is concepts that a child can understand, and yet we've allowed science to complicate it to a point where, technically, everyone's right side up, but, and it's like God, is technically somewhere out there past the universe. Like he's, omnipresent, he's omniscient. I mean, all of these qualities of God, we all know that. And as a Christian, you ask me the question, like, how's this affected me? I've always had a strong walk with the Lord. But this revelation, researching this, I can't even comprehend how much closer God became. Because when I looked up in the sky, I'm like, wow. I mean, these verses clearly say that he is literally above the firmament. And the firmament being understood as literally a physical, structure. And if anyone's ever seen like the Truman Show or a movie like that, this is what the Bible describes. It might seem absurd, but again, this is what the Bible describes. It talks about in Genesis how the firmament divided the waters from the waters. And for the longest time as a creationist, I always was looking at these type of verses, and I'm like, scratching my head. I'm like, well, don't really understand that. Move on. And then I get to the pillars. Well, I don't understand that. How you put pillars? What about the four corners? What about the edges of the earth? What about? And again, you'd have major problems. Well, we just brush it off. But when you go back and you start reading these and say, okay, I'm just going to try to take this literal, and I want to see what happens. What's interesting is when you start taking the concept of an enclosed creation, that the moon, sun, and stars were all created inside, and it says in Genesis, not outside the firmament, because you got to understand, the firmament or expanse or sky, it's called, the whole idea of space, of vacuum, black, dark, nothing, all these adjectives we give to space, is something that really is not biblical, and it's something to be looked into. But if you look at the Genesis account, it says the sun, moon, and stars were put in the firmament. You have major problems if you understand the expanse or all the translations. It doesn't matter what you look at, because clearly these things are a lot closer than what we've been told. They're not, the sun's not 93 million miles away. I mean, there's major problems every single which way. These are theories that they put up that were absurd. I mean, you said the Timothy quote, the Timothy verse, but there's a few other verses that talk about the wisest of men will become fools in God's eyes. Like, they literally are fools. And the wisest men that we've set up as our, as our teachers and as our, we look up to, and they're the experts in our world. We've literally elevated them to a point where we don't even question them anymore. We just sit there and say, well, yeah, these are smart men. They have PhDs. They went to university. We all understand that university, I think the statistics are that 70% of people that are raised in the church, in 1 year of university, will lose their faith. Universities have been set up to completely kill God in your mind. And that's the reality. And it's unfortunate that, including myself for so long, I still, it wasn't that I even was trying to combat it. It was fact. Who argues the fact that, we're not on a spinning ball? I spun the globe, and it is the interesting thing because it is the earliest indoctrination for children. They don't have to do anything other than just put the globe in the classroom and have a teacher point, hey, Johnny, that's where you live. Isn't that fun? And you spin it, and you never question it. Nobody that goes through science, and when they start getting into the spinning ball, the concept of the globe, start questioning it. They get taught exactly how it is. But we're not taught anymore to critically think. And that's unfortunate, where, God gave us a brain. He says, test all things. And I think that's important, that we need to test the theories of very anti-biblical, Messianic, Jesuit, people that came in throughout the centuries, and Satan worked, and he knew that he needed to work on this. It's a multi-generational program, is what Satan works on. He doesn't care about a lie, a year here. He cares about a multi-generational. And it only takes a couple generations to change a worldview. And he understood that really, literally, by 3 generations, he could literally change everything. But again, it had to take hold. The heliocentric model, that whole entire concept, once it took hold, everything else took place. You don't even just have the humanistic, you have the biological sciences. Now you get into Freud and you start understanding the psychological sciences. If you understand where all the sciences started to come from, they all came from the foundation, from the Copernican model. It was something that opened up. It was like Pandora's box. And literally, it is something so massive that people need to understand what they're dealing with when it comes to, what Copernican did. And it's not that Copernican was the first one. I mean, you have the Pythagorean theorem, you've got a bunch before him, but it was him that broke it open, to a point where it could not be tamed anymore, and that everyone ran with it because it was something that could completely, explain everything without God. And that's exactly what, all of this that we're discussing today has done. It literally has put everything in motion where you do not need a God. All you need is a bang.
Well, Robbie, that's what it's been 400 years, and that's what brought tears to my eyes when I realized how Satan has just pulled the wool over, just has hoodwinked us. And another thing that you covered a lot of bases there, and boy, I've had the same thoughts, the same exact thoughts, and I just feel so blessed, Robbie, that I'm talking to a younger man that's got a little bit more. Your bulb is a little bit. I'm running with about a 30 watt because I'm 71 years old, but you're running on about a 150 watt bulb. And I love you, brother, for sharing this, because I've had everything that you've shared here the last 10 minutes. It's come through when I wake in the morning, and I was saying to God this morning, just only give me what I can understand. And when you understand this 400-year lie, it's sometimes it's a little overwhelming. And I'm thankful for every one of these listeners in here, because I know that they need fellowship and I need fellowship. And this is what this broadcast is about, is the hour of discernment. But I want to touch on this now. This is what came to me this morning. You mentioned allegory. They want to dismiss all these Bible. There's over 200 Bible. I have a young friend. I've been pounded with the flat earth for 12 years, and she's not connected to the internet. And she got it solely from the Bible. And there's over 200 Bible verses. I'm going to get with Carol and get every single Bible verse listed, because it does not paint the picture of a spinning ball.
No, it doesn't.
And the next thing is what Marshall Hall said. He said that the exposure of this great lie will participate back to the Bible movement that will shake the world. Because the apostate, and this is where I want to go, all these creation ministries and all these seminaries and Bible colleges, let's just focus on the creation ministries. And I'm not to pick on Ken Hovind. I've learned an awful lot. But Ken Hovind is solidly heliocentric. And I believe the reason why he's heliocentric is because he has listened to his professors, and he's been educated by the academic world, which every single university in this world teaches heliocentric. Could you have a comment on the creation ministries and why they teach heliocentric?
Yeah, I had mentioned that also in the documentary, and I nothing but love for Kent Hovind and Ken Ham. I actually learned a lot in just over 20 years as a Christian. A lot of my education and equipping me, and with the whole creation versus evolution. It was a huge wake up. There's no doubt about it. So I think it's cognitive dissonance in the sense that this is just so grand. You have to understand that from an early age we're spinning the globe. The globe is so put into our brains that it's just the unquestionable. And I think that the attack, it's almost like Satan would allow, a major attack to take place against, we're fighting the fact that we came from monkeys, and no, God created us. And our whole war is on the fact that, no, we're not just an animal, we're special. Well, Satan's sitting back and he's watching that and he's saying, okay, am I really, majorly threatened by this? Well, I don't think that he was really threatened by it. Why is it that, it took me over 20 years to realize this. I mean, I read the Bible, you read the Bible. I mean, how many times did we read the creation? And yet all these verses we didn't pick up on. How come, we didn't? So I think that it's just because our whole worldview, when it comes to evolution, it's not a worldview. It's a theory. It's something that you're fighting. But it's not literally the worldview, what you're standing on. When you look out in the sky, everything you've been taught, to understand the fact that everything that you've been taught is a lie is so overwhelming for most people, and rightfully so. I mean, it is for anyone. The first knee reaction is, wow, this can't be true. And I think a lot of people just don't want to take the time because it's just so major of a deception. It's hard to grasp. So, but I think it's important for everyone to at least give it the time. Even a few days, I think, would be enough if a person looked into it and saw, the monster lies and just the connection of what's taking place. But I think with these ministries, I think that we need to lovingly, present the information, our case, start doing our research. I think God is not only going to call us, to reach the world, as he always has, but I think he's going to call us as well, to reach people in the church. Because like you had mentioned, I mean, this is a huge paradigm shift. And again, when people come, like what I've noticed even personally in my circles, even talking with my pastor or people in the church, that, it does become a very big deal. I mean, one thing I do hear from a lot of people is that, well, what does it matter? What does it matter if it's a ball or it's flat or it's square or it's a triangle? I mean, who cares? But what I'll say? Does truth matter? And I mean, truth is very important to God. I mean, and I always, at the end of all my videos on my channel, Celebrate Truth, I leave off with John 14:6. And Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. But literally, understanding and the pursuit of truth is worthy. And it's something that God calls all of us to do, to test all things, to worship him in spirit and in truth. And I think truth is important. And if it's not important, then, I don't understand, why there's so many verses that support the fact that it is. But again, we understand that we're on this quest for truth. If all of a sudden you start figuring it out, that what we have been taught are lies, what is it going to do? Like you said, one of the biggest, movements or the awakening, or what is it going to do to God's church? I think it's massive. And I think that, the attacks that have come against, people that don't believe in evolution are minuscule compared to the attacks that will come of people questioning and getting science to answer questions. And that's the only thing that I'm going to literally say with people that are very scientifically minded, that are looking and saying, this can't be true, this is so absurd. Then get science to start answering the questions, just like you did the same with evolution and they didn't have the answers. Do the same, and you will find out there are major issues with almost every aspect of the Big Bang heliocentric universe that they have taught us, when the Bible is very clear that literally we have been created in an enclosed creation and that we are special and that we are different and unique from everything else up in the sky. The entire monster lie that I see is to relegate Earth to a spinning ball and make it a planet. Earth is not a planet. And when you look into it and say, okay, this guy is saying on the radio right now, he's saying it's not a planet. I'm going to go out and prove him wrong. Go out. Prove that Earth is a ball. Try to do it scientifically using the scientific method. You will find you're going to have a very hard time. You can get the curvature rates that science has given us based on 25,000 miles in circumference. You can find out that, after 20 miles, there'd be so much drop, that things would be below the horizon. Start doing that. Look with your own eyes. Start using science if you are scientifically minded. Because again, we're not talking about anti-science here. We're talking about anti-scientism. That science, that real true science was hijacked, was taken over and masqueraded as fact, as reality. And yet it basically deviated from what science was all about, asking questions, observing, repeating experiments, something that could be verified, tested. Do you know that even when it comes to gravity has never been tested, it's never been observed, it's never been quantified, if you even look up gravity, because you need gravity to be able to stick to a spinning ball flying through space. Understand that the entire universe, it only exists because of, they call it the big G. Our big G is God. It is the Lord God in heaven. Their big G, that if they don't have an answer to the question, you watch what they'll say. Well, it's gravity. It's gravity. Well, how does it do this? Well, it's gravity. What about the sun? Well, that's gravity. And if you look up the definition of gravity on Wikipedia, I challenge anyone to look it up. Read that and ask yourself, is that science? Is that scientific? Or is that some sort of mysterious, magical power that they basically, anytime there's a missing hole, at least, with evolution, they admit, well, there's missing links. We don't know what it is. But what they do with the heliocentric Big Bang universe is anytime they're up against a problem, that's gravity. That's the way gravity works. Well, how does gravity know to keep 8 trillion tons of ocean, and yet butterflies can fly above it? Why is it that the moon's gravity, is so powerful it can affect the tides, but yet the moon's gravity won't suck the moon right down? There's major problems. So if you start looking into all of these concepts and start using your head and saying, okay, I want to know what true science is. I want to question these things. I want to test all things. Then go out and do it, and you will be shocked, and you will be almost appalled. And like you were, Walt, and myself, you'll be saddened. You will be saddened. You will be emotional, because it is something to come to the understanding that, wow, this has all been a lie. And we have all believed it, that Satan, literally the God of this world, could literally get the whole world to believe something, and he could literally start with a foundational lie, and that everything else was easy, or other things he didn't even care about, as long as he basically completely got people believing and discrediting the Bible. Because like me and like many other people, we are still looking at verses and we're saying, well, we'll just interpret that a different way, because you can't really have pillars on a ball. We have taken our worldview, and because we have a scientific worldview, understand that people without a scientific worldview try. It's really tough to do, but try to look at the Bible without a scientific worldview. Just if he was to present you his word and you were just to read it, and you read all these verses, maybe draw it and see what you come up with. But what the interesting thing is, now you've got all these people in sciences, in military, you've got pilots coming forward, you've got surveyors, you've got all sorts of engineers are coming forward now. There are all sorts of people of all different backgrounds are coming forward with basically the creation account of Genesis and constructing it and saying, okay, this seems silly, but they're saying it's flat, it's not a ball. Well, I know it's a ball, so I'm going to go out and test, and I'm going to prove everyone that it is, I'm going to prove the curve. Well, people are going out all over the world, and you can type this in YouTube. Just type in flat Earth curvature. There is no curve. It does not exist. Pilots are coming forward and saying, and people say, well, no, I took a plane, I looked out the window, I saw it. I challenge anyone, go the next time you're on a plane, look out again. It's almost like the conditioning was so strong that we were programmed to see the curve, because people are trying now to go up and disprove it and take pictures. Once they go up, they're not seeing it anymore. They're taking pictures, they're bringing it back in with rulers. It is flat as a pancake. And here's the interesting thing, that no matter if you're standing on a beach and you look out at that horizon, it's eye level. So then you go up on a mountain, you look at the horizon, it's at eye level. Now you go up in a hot air balloon, it's at the horizon, eye level. Now you go up on a plane, the horizon, always at eye level. If we're on a ball of 25,000 miles in circumference, the higher you went in altitude, the lower the horizon would go down. It is simple physics, it's simple geometry. I mean, you can construct this, you can put it in a 3D simulator. People are doing it all over the world. But understand that the higher you go up on a ball, the lower horizon would drop. Yet at any altitude, other than the pictures from NASA give us, the highest that we can get up, unmanned, is in a military, grade weather balloon to 110, 120,000 feet. And without a curved lens, a fisheye lens, a GoPro camera, if you actually put a straight lens, a regular lens without the curves, because you'll find that a lot of lenses, create the curve. But if you go up, people are going up all over, and what they're seeing is flat as far as the eye can see, zero curvature. And again, it might seem absurd, but once you realize, wait a minute, if we're not on a spinning ball, then what else have they lied about? Because again, people are just not being able to find this information when they find out that, everything we have been taught is a lie, and then you understand why they would have to lie about it. Well, what does it matter? And I say, truth matters. And once you start going into this research, prayerfully ask God to reveal to you his true creation, Don't use any biases. Don't use your scientific worldview. Ask God to show you and give you your brains and your senses to experiment, to test, to verify. God will verify himself, and he will verify his creation to anyone that seeks.
Well, Robbie, I'll tell you, I understand you touched on why people will get a little teary-eyed, because you'll understand that Bible that we have in our hands, if we read it literally, it does not describe a spinning ball. And I'm sure you've come across this in your, there has been some experiments between geocentric and heliocentric, and they've all proven, they've all come to the conclusion that we're not spinning. Could you touch on that?
There's actually been some incredible experiments done. I mean, there's the Michael Morrison experiment done. If you look at Dr. Robotham, if you look up these experiments, I mean, he did it. And again, there has been great scientific minds that have, went out to prove this curvature of this, globe that we're taught that we're on. And yet all of these experiments, have proved to support the fact that we are on a stationary plane. I mean, you get into certain experimentations that were done showing absolutely zero movement, and it's been a big problem for science, and they have worked on getting around it and stuff. But again, you have to almost look it up. I don't know offhand, but again, if you look into the experiments for movement and for the spinning, and I mean, people will bring up the Coriolis effect, and they'll bring up some other factors. Well, if you start looking into these, you will see that there's some major problems, like huge problems, and a lot of the stuff that we've been taught, just isn't the case. So. There's experiments done with cannons that they would shoot cannons straight out. And again, you're talking about if the Earth is spinning, you've got issues. You've got issues with planes, you're going one direction on a flight and you're going with the spin. Well, what happens when you're on a flight going against the spin, right? So they're also shooting cannons straight out. Well, they were finding in the experimentation, they would shoot it out and sometimes it would come right back into the cannon. So if we're spinning at 1,000 miles per hour at the equator, this isn't impossible. The fact is that no scientific experiment, has ever been done that you and I can do together, that we can test, we can repeat, we can both observe, that will prove that we are on any type of movement at all, period. We are relying on the great scientism minds and NASA to tell us that we're on a spinning ball. But what I'm saying is there is zero experimentation to prove that the Earth spins, at the velocity is what they're telling us. Everything, from the speed of lightning, traveling, these are absurd things. And yet even orbiting the sun and going around its elliptic, no one's ever felt movement. No one's even felt a jolt. No one's ever felt, anything. And yet they tell us these things and we believe them. Why? Because of gravity. Well, that's the way gravity works. I mean, you're dealing with the ball spinning so fast, with centrifugal force, but yet the gravity is compensating the centrifugal force. But then ask yourself a logical question. If you're going to basically create, say your dining room, you're going to create up this dining room, and you're going to go, I want to light this dining room. Are you going to create a light that is 100 million times bigger than the dining room to light it? I mean, God created lights, for the sun, like he created the sun and the moon and the stars, and he said, I created them for lights. Just think of how absurd it is for God, to literally create a light that's 1 million times bigger than the actual creation itself. I mean, to give this recognition that we were honoring. I mean, even some of the planets, so-called planets in our solar system, are a lot bigger than Earth. I mean, doesn't that seem striking that literally Earth is the epitome, it's the prize, it's the incredible creation, unique, special, different, and yet we're not the biggest. We're not we do sustain life. And again, they're on that quest to find it. Apparently they found another, 10 million planets way out there in the universe that all sustain life. They found Earth 2.0. And again, you're constantly going to keep seeing this. And when you start seeing them constantly trying to find water on Mars, and they found traces of water, so therefore there was life that existed there at some point, they believe. But their quest is to find that answer. And I believe that they are going to find that answer, but that answer is going to come from another life form out there. But the fact of the reality is there is no others out there. There are humans. There are angels. Where do they exist? In our enclosed creation. The illusion of a eternal, the space itself is labeled eternal. Well, I'm sorry, God is the only one that's eternal. That's the whole thing is when you're talking infinite, they say infinite. We are finite. The earth is finite. The heavens are finite. To give space and the universe and the galaxies and, to say that they're all infinite. No. These are monster lies. These are satanic deception to fool us, to trick us. And unfortunately, it's done a number, but there's some great, God is reviving a lot of people looking into it from different walks, different backgrounds, different credibilities. And I think it's just a matter of time where more and more people are going to start questioning these things. Science will not be able to give the answers. And people will demand. And I think we're headed towards a very large paradigm shift. I really do, in many, many circles.
Well, Robbie, I really want to thank you. This has been a blessing for me. Especially you. Last time I talked to you, when you told me you were getting ready to release this video, it really moved me, and I was so anxious to have for this broadcast. But could you tell in our closing comments? Could you tell people where they can find your works?
Sure. Yeah. My YouTube channel. You can just type in Celebrate Truth. You can find my page also on Facebook if you want to look for me there. But yeah, Celebrate Truth. I just released the Global Lie documentary on January 25th, which, interesting enough, was a very historic day. It's turning out to be, because if anyone's looking into the news, you're going to see that, through certain celebrities and some things that have started to happen, Flat Earth is gaining a lot of traction and mainstream. You have Neil deGrasse Tyson, one of these scientific guys that is very, against God. And in my documentary, I actually have him a few places in there, his, how much he actually hates the Bible and God. And I mean, whether it's Richard Dawkins or it's, Bill Nye, the science guy, I mean, all these guys are very anti-biblical. They hate God. They hate creation. They tell everyone to come to reality and accept science as fact and, don't be deluded. And yet these guys continue on. Well, anyways, Neil deGrasse Tyson responded to one of this rappers, and it's blowing up on Twitter, on Facebook. And if you actually type in Flat Earth and click news, you'll probably see, thousands of articles from CNN to New York Times to. So again, and we always felt that, 2016 something was going to big happen. We didn't know how, but God is using people in different areas and stuff to reveal his true creation. And people would say, well, how come, God wouldn't reveal this before? But I think that the timing, like I said, we're moving into a great deception, something, we're getting closer to something, and there's no reason why that God wouldn't start showing people, basically we had fought the war against evolution, and yet now the war goes on to the heliocentric Big Bang universe and understanding the creation that we exist on. So yeah, my work, you can be found at Celebrate Truth on YouTube. I'm also on Facebook. And at that point, send me a message, watch the videos. I have over 60 videos. My channel has been I've been up for about 5 months now. And yeah, it's extraordinary, especially with the film that I just released. The results and the response and the reviews are absolutely phenomenal. So God is doing a tremendous work. Many people are opening the Bible for the first time, coming to this flat earth revelation, looking into the facts, and then all of a sudden they're saying, hey, I want to see what the Bible has to say. So the testimonies and the amount of atheists that are becoming, agnostics overnight is alarming. And also seeing how many people are completely going to the Word of God and going deep into the Word of God because they want to know truth. I've never seen anything like it in my life. So it's exciting, and it's a pleasure to be here, Walt. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, and thanks. And because my closing comments is God has revealed it through His Word, and I look at your life and my life and fellow brothers and sisters in Christ, and I think it's a direct hand from God that we're seeing this, especially in a world where the whole academic world is heliocentric. And I'm going to close with this little song. And heliocentric is the granddaddy of all deceptions in the world today. And this is the closing song. It seems to be one big lie.
Seems to be that this world is in a mess. Seems to be all life's just a test. Seems to be we think we've lived our lives the best, and it's clear to see that only God will judge and bless. Seems to be that we've lived our life in lies. Seems to be we are born and then we die. Seems to be life passes, it just flies, and it's clear to see that only God's truth will survive. Seems to be this world can bring fame, riches, mantles of honor and glory, just for a time and a season. Fame, riches, mantles of honor and glory, with no everlasting purpose or reason. Seems to be that this world is in a mess. Seems to be all life's just a test. Seems to be we think we've lived our lives the best, and it's clear to see that only God will judge and bless. Seems to be.
And such. And if you actually even look at the early church, and even the great reformers, I mean, you have like Martin Luther, you've got Augustine, you've got John Calvin. I mean, these guys were going so far as to say that these men that were coming and proposing up these ideas, were possessed by the devil. So they were warning, and rightfully so. But unfortunately, it gained ground rapidly in the church, through Rome, through the Catholic Church. And there's a story there with Galileo and how they did the Hegelian dialectic in creating an illusion that they would be fighting, science versus religion. And that's what they proposed to us, that science is wonderful. The scientific method is great. But when science gets hijacked and it becomes an agenda and it becomes theories and beliefs, these are the theories that were set up that basically, to this day, they're considered fact. And anyone that tries to debate these are considered, they're ridiculed, they're laughed at. But indeed, once you look into it, just like the lies of evolution, all these theories about the heliocentric Big Bang universe they're theories. And they are not scientifically proven. So when you apply the real scientific method, you will find that a lot of this stuff cannot be proved scientific. These are things that took hold to further destroy the credibility of the Bible. And all the scientists that came after Copernicus, if anything, they got all their illumination from the great enlightenment and discovery that he had made when, up until that time, it was always considered through science about a geocentric, stationary Earth.
Can you hear me, Robbie?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I would like to make a comment. In your studies, did you ever look at who is the father of the Big Bang?
Well, when you're getting into it, like you're going back into, if you're starting, the Big Bang, it was coined by different, people. Basically, it came to a point where actually the Big Bang actually wasn't even like the correct title, but it took hold. And when you do your research, you'll find that basically they just ran with the whole Big Bang theory. But you'll find that later on they had some major problems, and to this day they still have some major problems. Yet it's just like evolution. Anyone that speaks out against this, there's scientists that are around the world that are scared about.
Have you introduce your video and tell your testimony?
Well, yeah, basically coming up with the concept and, and doing my research for the last 6 months, uncovering, the root. I think for most of the church, they were busy, basically attacking the branches of the tree and never really looking at the root. And if you understand the entire war of creation versus evolution, you'll see that most of the attack was centered around, the Darwin model that, we evolved over, millions of years, and we came from ancestors as monkeys. And again, this was the lie that was, all focused on. But again, you have to kind of dig deeper and find out, well, where did this lie originate from? Where do we get evolution? And if you look back, you'll see that you get it through the entire heliocentric model that was proposed. Now, again, this had gone on for a while, but it didn't take root until Nicholas Copernicus, came out. And indeed, it was the Copernican heliocentricity concept that gradually broke the back of Bible credibility as a source of absolute truth in Christendom. Once the Copernican revolution had conquered the physical sciences of astronomy and physics and put down deep roots in universities and lower schools everywhere, it was only a matter of time until the biological sciences launched the Darwinian revolution. So if you understand that this is kind of the connection, between the two, and seeing that basically from the beginning of time, Satan has been after attacking, the authority and the foundation of the Word of God. And again, if you can get the Word, you can get the foundation to crumble, you can start doubting parts of the foundations of the Bible, then everything is opened up to interpretation. And I think that's where the devil has laid his assault, is definitely when it came to the creation account, but also, clear verses, throughout the entire Bible that talk about how we're geocentric, we're stationary, and that everything that was created above us moves, circuits, it does its thing, but we don't. And that's one of the things that they needed to break. They needed to break that whole paradigm, and they've done an incredible job. Throughout the centuries, there's always been great men of faith that have been crying in the wilderness, warning, about Copernicus models, publishing their findings, losing credibility, losing their job, just like, everything that's going on within the major universities. This is a group, an elite group, that do not allow anyone else to propose any ideas. And the whole idea of science is all about questions. Well, they don't want anything questioned anymore. This is fact, they say, and anything that fits their model, they will use. Anything that doesn't, they will throw out. So, looking into it, you can kind of see how, even before there were ideas there, but actually the Big Bang was a relatively new concept. But you'll see that Copernicus kind of eroded Ptolemy's, findings, but he absolutely hated the church, hated, the Bible account. And if you research all the major scientific, discoveries, and I'm talking from Kepler and Newton and Galileo, and, understand that if you go deeper into it, you will find out that there's a very, hidden kind of agenda taking place because they needed to erode the credibility of the Bible. The Bible clearly says, that the sun moves in multiple occasions. And some people will say, well, that was the translation of that day, or the men didn't understand that. But you have clear directives of commanding the sun to stop. And you have major issues, when you're talking about the Earth, stop spinning. If it was indeed, spinning at 1,000 miles at the equator, you've got problems with it flying through space. All of these things, it just takes someone to research it and digest the information, come in with an open mind, but look at the Bible, look at kind of what they're, speaking and what they're teaching, and you will find that it's a polar opposite of everything that is being taught. So it's something that is very, very important. Even if, any of your listeners are, literal 6-day creationists, they believe in a young Earth versus millions of years old. Well, you have a problem because day 4, the sun, moon, and stars are created. So if the Earth is created, what is it orbiting? If we're taught the heliocentric model that, we're orbiting around the sun at 660,000 miles an hour. I mean, just understand that right now what science teaches is that we are traveling around the sun faster than lightning. I mean, it is absolutely incredible, these figures. And it's just like evolution, where they bring in millions and millions and billions. They mask everything in large numbers so that, we just have to take their word for it, because, who of us are going to go out and do that math? But when you start thinking about these logically, you'll find that there's some major issues.
Talk shoes. Recorded live.
Look to the sky and God's perfect harmony. Don't trust the global light. Look with your own eyes. Look to the sky and see. God gave us eyes to see His perfect harmony. The moon in her own light, walking day and night. The sun coming up, the sun going down. The curtain of stars from the heavens around. Look to the sky and see. Look to the earth and know God causes all things to grow. Stretched out the earth in place, established her from base. Trust in the only God to know. Look to the sky and see God presents harmony. Don't trust the global light. Look with your own eyes. Look to the sky and see one God, creator of heaven and earth.
Greetings and welcome to Hour of Discernment on January 27th, 2016. Well, I've been looking forward to this for about a week, and yesterday on the broadcast, I reviewed my guest Robbie Davidson's video. It's called "The Global Lie: Flat Earth Revelation." And with that, welcome to the broadcast, Robbie.
Thanks for having me, Walt. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Well, listen, I have to, this flat Earth movement has moved me in more than one way, and I think it's more than a movement. And one of the reasons I think your documentation it comes from the biblical view, and so and yesterday we talked about I reviewed heliocentric and geocentric, and with that I'd just like to. Well, if you do a Google search on Father of the Big Bang, you will come to Georges Lemaitre. He's a Belgian cosmologist, a Catholic priest, and also a Jesuit. Mm-hmm. So, the Jesuits had their hand in it at the very beginning, because Galileo came about, after the King James Bible was published. So they were, and also if you do, the father of the New Age is the New Age movement is also a Jesuit. He's a Frenchman, and I can't pronounce his name right now. But don't you think, Robbie, that heliocentric was the birth of the New Age movement?
Yeah, I think obviously it was the birth of many things. I mean, we're talking about, if you understand the heliocentric model, all the lies, everything that you start seeing, that's happening around the world. I mean, you can get into so many things. You can even get into futuristic things like the transhumanistic movement. Everything originates from the idea that they're going to find other life out there, that the other life will create the answers for us at some point, possibly. And you have major scientists. Richard Dawkins is a big believer of this, but most credible, in the scientific community are definitely talking about how feasible it would be for an intelligent life form to have injected their DNA into a monkey, and created us at some point in the universe. So understand that basically, for the great deception that's going to come into the world, it says it will deceive the whole world. And I'm looking at it more and more in my research that could it be that science is the great one world religion that's spoken about? In ways, it's something that has been masqueraded as fact, but indeed it is religion. It's almost everyone, believes this and takes this as fact. It was almost like Satan's assault. Rather than come up with a new belief system, he comes up with fact. He comes up with something that cannot be disputed. It's not a belief. It's reality, or so he, wanted to tell the world. And yet we've bought this hook, line, and sinker. And Satan has worked with great big agencies such as the scientific community, but also when you're getting into like the space agencies, because up until, the 1960s, really